I'm Dr. Craig Escudé, the host of IDD Health Matters, a podcast where we talk about health, wellness, and health equity for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Hope you enjoy it.
The IDD Health Matters podcast is a joint production between Friends for Life and Intellect Ability. For more information, go down into the show notes and click the link where it says Learn More Here.
Hello and welcome to this episode of IDD Health Matters. We have a great guest today, Kathryn Pears with the National Task Group on, and finish that.
Intellectual Disabilities and Dementia Practices. It's a mouthful, the NTG for short.
Thank you for finishing that for me. I talk about it all the time in a lot of the presentations that I do, but I usually have the words up there so I can read them and not get too flabbergasted.
NTG works.
Yeah. So tell us about the NTG and what you do there.
Absolutely. The NTG is really not only nationally, but more and more so internationally, the only organization, nonprofit, we're 501c3, that focuses solely on individuals who are aging with intellectual disabilities and at risk of or developing dementia. And started in 2010 as part of the National Alzheimer's Project Act when that was being debated federally. And our two co-founders, Dr. Matt Janicki and Dr. Seth Keller, realized that when we're talking about federal policy and dementia, really we're talking about the general population with dementia. Really. Weren't thinking at all about the fact that there were these other underserved populations and didn't think that was right. And so they got involved in sort of federal advocacy, trying to raise awareness that there is this whole other population who in many ways their needs are similar, but also very different than the general population.
That parallels a lot of thoughts in medicine and in dentistry where we think more about, the general population, but we don't always think about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
And like dementia, it's not that the disease is really different per se. It just may present very differently. It may be a little more challenging to diagnose. And in some cases, 100%. It does occur more, we know, in people with Down syndrome. Yeah. So I think, I know you guys have developed some special tools to help diagnose that. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, we have what's called the NTG-EDSD, which refers to early dementia.
Early detection?
Early detection screen for dementia. Even I stumble over it periodically. Early detection screen for dementia. It doesn't diagnose dementia, but what it does is it's a wonderful tool, and the beauty of it is it can be done by anyone. It doesn't have to be done by a clinician. A family member can use it. Frontline staff can use it. Anyone can do it. It's really very intuitive, and it establishes a baseline. So, for instance, for people with Down syndrome, we say start it at least by the age of 35 or 40. If it's someone with another form of intellectual disability, by the age of 45 or 50. And it asks a bunch of questions, and these questions come in sort of boxes, and we refer to those as signal items. And they are symptoms that might suggest, some form of dementia. And you do it annually. And whoever knows the person best will go through this form and make little check boxes if there's been a change in this particular item over the last year. And so you may go for years and not see any check boxes in these two columns. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 years down the road, let's say it's someone with Down syndrome, all of a sudden you're starting to see checks where it's, getting up and wandering at night, not wanting to engage in activities they used to enjoy doing, those sorts of things. And that's your clue that something's changed in their baseline. And then the question is, what do we do? What do we do about it?
Figure it out.
Maybe it's a potentially treatable condition. It's not, the tool isn't going to give you a score at the end. It's going to say, oh yes, this person has, Alzheimer's disease or some other form of dementia. It's just going to say something's changed, and then prompt staff to take the next steps to figure out maybe this is a treatable condition. Maybe it's a B12 deficiency. Maybe it's sleep apnea. Maybe it's one of these other things, or it could be the onset of Alzheimer's. But it's sort of a prompt to do that. And I think that one of the really important pieces of this tool is, in this field, so many people have worked 20, 25 years with the same people. And you get so used to looking at seeing someone, sometimes you don't see those little subtle changes in them. And this really sort of forces you at least once a year to take a literal and figurative step back and look very holistically at the individual in a whole bunch of different domains. And, you may identify areas that have changed in the last year in that person that you might not have thought of or picked up on otherwise, unless you were forced to look at this checklist and kind of think about them.
And I know that tool is available in quite a number of languages.
Many different languages. It's free on our website, which is www.the-ntg.org. And it's free to download in its many different languages. It's an electronic version on there. There's a little manual, brief manual. It's very intuitive. It's not hard at all to pick up on and do. And it's used widely across the country. There are a couple of states, I believe, that actually mandate its use. So
that's excellent.
It's been found to be highly, highly useful to sometimes pick up on those early signs when hopefully someday there'll be a treatment that will make it even more important.
There's some progress being made in that, some promising progress.
There is some promising biomarkers and some of the new therapeutics, which of course weren't tested in clinical trials in people with ID, but
sure. Right. So, Kathryn, how did you get into this field?
Oh, gosh, I've been involved in the field of dementia for 40 plus years. My dad was diagnosed when he was 56 years old back in 1981 with Alzheimer's. We took care of him at home for 10 years. This is not a field I ever envisioned I would go into. But I learned as a family caregiver, particularly around the behaviors of dementia, how difficult it is for families to deal with those. And so I made kind of a career change from managing a medical practice at the time to going into the field of dementia. I worked for the Alzheimer's Association in Maine for a number of years, and then had my own training and consulting company. And since I came upon the NTG in about 2010, 2011, and been involved with them in their steering committee. Now they're chief operations officer.
That's about the time we probably met the first time, was when you must probably were early on
then,
because I was still in Mississippi then, practicing then,
and I think I had just moved to South Carolina, so it was probably around 2013ish or so.
You came and gave a talk at the state IDD conference, basically, and it was very impressive to me. I've always remembered your name. I'm terrible with names. But your name is always stuck in my head.
You flatter me.
So it was great to see you over here today at the AADMD conference, American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry Conference in Chicago. Is where we're coming from. So it's great that you're here and representing the NTG and sharing.
We're happy to be here and letting people know who we are and what we have going on.
Yep. So Kathryn, tell us about other things that the NTG does.
Well, we do a lot of things. As I said previously, we sort of started in that advocacy role, that federal advocacy role. And it wasn't too long after we did that, we realized that staff in group homes, in other congregate settings, understood how to care for people with ID, but they'd never been faced with an aging population before, and certainly not with having to care for people with dementia before. So we decided we needed a curriculum. One didn't exist. And so myself and Dr. Kathleen Bishop raised our hands and said we would chair a committee to do that. And we had about 80 people on our committee. And we developed a national model training curriculum on intellectual disabilities and dementia-capable care of this population, which to date, that was back in 2014 or so. So here we are 10 years later, 2024. So far, we have trained over 4,000 frontline workers, everyone from doctors and dentists we've had take the training, through nurses, OT, PT, administrative staff, in service provider organizations, direct support personnel, obviously, and even some family members, and recently law enforcement officers, actually. It's a 3-day workshop. We offer it all around the country. We do it 2 or 3 times a year online as well. And so that was a big piece of what we did. And then through that, we've gotten involved in other projects. We have a big project going on now in Texas, in partnership with the University of Texas Health Science Centers, Dr. David Frey with the ADMD. Yep. This was actually, he's involved in the project, funded by the Texas Developmental Disabilities Council, doing training statewide over 5 years in our NTG curriculum, and also recently got additional funding from them to work with law enforcement. And we set out thinking that law enforcement needed training on IDD. What we found is that they actually get a lot of training on IDD.
Really?
But there were some other aspects of how they do their job, and when they get called to, let's say, a group home that has someone who's causing some issues for them, some other issues around that. So we're working with law enforcement in Texas, trying to develop some solutions.
Yeah.
And we hope that eventually what we learn in Texas at the end of our 5 years there, we'll be able to take for a more national model and spread some of the learning around in other states as well.
That's exciting that you've kind of spilled over into the law enforcement training and identified the need. You said they receive a lot of training?
There's a lot of training out there for IDD, for law enforcement.
I don't always hear that.
Yeah, it does exist. And so we thought we were going to develop a training for law enforcement. And then we realized, well, there's actually a lot of that exists. One of the things that law enforcement identified for us, however, was that they have a challenge if they get called to a group home for someone who's having, a behavioral issue or whatever, that when they get to the group home, they don't necessarily know anything about this person and what they're walking into.
Yes.
And maybe, people with IDD, some people are very, they don't want you coming near them. Right. That can escalate a situation. Oftentimes there are co-occurring medical conditions that can be causing that behavioral, but it's a medical cause, not a psychiatric issue.
That's my favorite thing to talk on.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they don't know that when they go to the home. So one of the things we're working on is, can we develop a training for group home staff on what do you need to tell law enforcement when you make the 911 call? And we're working with a dispatch supervisor in Brownsville, Texas. I was there 3 weeks ago, who's fabulous and very strong. And the Brownsville Police Department has done a lot of work in this area, actually. And she's going to work with us to develop, what does a dispatcher need to know when the group home calls them, so that the law enforcement, when they go in, are prepared and, things don't go from bad to worse quickly, which they can.
I tell you, that's something that once you have it developed should spread like wildfire throughout this field. It really should.
We started out thinking we knew what we were doing and realized we didn't know, but now
we've all been there at some point. I can say
we're coming along. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting work.
We're doing a lot of things with the NTG. So, we hope people will visit our website. There's a wealth of information on our website. All our publications are free to download. And
Friends for Life Residential Care, specializing in support for individuals with developmental disabilities, offers services like adult day support and home health care. Emphasizing empowerment and quality of life, we live by the motto, "My ability is stronger than my disability." We are currently hiring, welcoming those passionate about making a difference. Learn more and explore career opportunities at friendsforliferc.com.
I'm Dr. Craig Escudé, President of Intellectability. State developmental disability agencies, managed care organizations, and providers across the United States use Intellectability's health risk screening tool, e-learn courses, and person-centered training to improve health equity for people with IDD. Visit replacingrisks.com to learn more about how you can employ these tools with people you support.
There's a little thing I do called 3 in 3. So it's 3 things in 3 minutes, 3 tips, 3 words of wisdom, 3 pieces of advice that you'd like the audience to know about what you do and or how, what you think can improve the world for people with IDD.
I could probably give you 33, but I'll try to keep it to 3. one of the first things that comes to mind is that as an individual with IDD ages and you see a change in their ability to function, please do not automatically assume it's the onset of Alzheimer's disease or some other form of dementia. Diagnosing Alzheimer's or any of those other irreversible forms, as you know all too well, is a diagnosis of exclusion.
Yep.
And we should first and foremost be ruling out medication issues, co-occurring medical conditions, lots of potentially treatable.
Even social situations, sometimes.
Social depression, and so forth. Particularly true in this true in the general population.
Vision changes, all of those things can sometimes look like dementia.
Look like Alzheimer's disease, but they're potentially treatable. And sadly, what I oftentimes see is just this knee-jerk reaction. Oh, this individual's 50 years old and he has Down syndrome, so
that's what it is.
It's Alzheimer's disease. And it's not fair to the individual, and it's not the right way to be doing it anyway. So that would be,
That's a great number one.
First and foremost. The second, I think, is, to me, the basis of good dementia care is you don't even have to have any real trainings. We offered specific training on how to do very specific things in caring for someone. But to me, if you boil it all down, it comes down to one thing, and that's treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself.
Well said.
And my area of specialization is behavioral and psychiatric, behaviors of dementia. But one of the things I find is that so much of those behaviors are reactions to things that caregivers do inadvertently. And we're trying to boss people around and tell them, don't do that or do this or whatever. And I think even some of the most combative behaviors are pretty reasonable and rational responses by the person with dementia to how they perceive.
It's probably similar to how you or I might respond.
No kidding.
If we were treated the same way, right?
No kidding. So I think the essence of good dementia care is just treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself, and think about how would I respond if somebody approached me in this manner. And if the answer is probably not so well, then you got to look at how you're doing things. And I think the third thing I would say sort of goes to the advocacy. One of the things we talk about in our workshops when we're training people is we're not trying to train you to be an expert in dementia care or the co-occurring medical conditions or all. All we want you to know is know enough to be dangerous and be an advocate, because this is a population of people who don't have a voice really in the healthcare system. And, just know enough that if something doesn't strike you as right, if person's being prescribed a medication for behavior and you think that's
just not right, not necessarily the right thing to do, don't be afraid to speak out about it.
Speak up, Don't mean to offend anyone. I know you're a physician, but, not all physicians are experts in this field.
I can totally relate to that from my own personal experience.
And, so just know enough to be dangerous. Educate. Knowledge is power. Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Get on our website. Learn what you can.
All right, let's give the website one more time.
www.the-ntg.org.
Excellent. Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, and more importantly, for the incredible work that you're doing in this field and for people with dementia.
It's been a treat. Thank you so much. Thanks for all you're doing to spread the word.
Thanks.